Wonderful. So I did get one question regarding when I took the exam. I took the middle level exam in fourth grade in fifth grade prior to sixth grade, entering into middle school. And then I took the exam again in eighth grade, but prior to high school. The exam I took in fifth grade was the middle level exam, and the exam that I took in eighth grade was the upper level exam. All right, so on to math. So if you look at this title page right here, you're going to see that it says you have 42 questions, and you have 36 minutes to answer these questions, which means timing is everything for this test. You have less than a minute to answer these questions, so they say. But I'd rather you think about it in this way. You have to get the first 20 questions done within the first 15 minutes of the test. That way you have a little bit more than, the allotted time to get the last questions done. It's really because they get harder as you go through. So you want to take as little time as possible for those easy questions and then save yourself the most time for when you get to those longer questions at the end. All right, so let's get started. So on this first question, what they want you to do, they really want you to take and waste your time. They want you to, use the area formula to calculate this, but it's quite simple. Each square in the grid has 5 centimeters, is 5 centimeters squared. So the best thing to do is just to count the number of squares, just go in 5. So you have 1, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. The answer is A. The area is 40 centimeters squared. Quite simple. All right, so for number 2, a jar contains 5 red balls, 6 blue balls, and 8 white balls. If one ball is chosen at random and then returned to the jar, and a second ball is chosen at random, what is the probability that both balls will be red? Sorry, someone wants a copy of the test. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy on me this second. I don't have a link. But an email will be sent out shortly for those who don't have the test, okay? But right now, please look at what I'm doing here, and you can sort of follow along. If you have a blank piece of paper at home, you can do them with me, okay? Thank you. Okay, so and a second ball is chosen at random. What is the probability that both balls will be red? Okay, so first of all, since you're not looking at one event, but rather 2 events that require probability, you're going to have 2 separate fractions because you're looking at 2 separate events. I'm sorry, one. Sorry, hello everyone. Okay.
And then Kai, I'm sending the link. So everyone look in the chat box. Okay. So I'm just hitting paste. So this is the drive and it has the exam. And I think, what page are we scrolling down to?
This is page, oops.
I think it's 30, right? 30. So everyone just open the link. I just put it into the chat box. So everyone look at the link, open it up. I'll send it again so that you have it. And this link, you can go to page 30 if you want to follow along. And this is what we used last week as well. We also emailed it out, so everyone should have received a hard copy of it. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that the AC was really loud. I want you guys to hear me perfectly. All right, so as I was saying before, this question has 2 probability events. So rather than having 1 fraction, you're going to be having 2, one for each event. Now, the first event is if one ball is chosen at random and then returned to the jar. right? So what is the probability that both will be red? Okay, so you have 5 red balls. So for the numerator, it'll be 5 for both. Both numerators will be 5, right? And then the denominator has to be the total number of balls, which is 19. Now, what they try to do, they try to trick you up and make you think that, oh, well, if one ball was removed, then the denominator would be 18 because you'd have 18 balls. But the ball was put back into the total group of all the balls. That means you'd have 19 again. And because it was returned, the probability will be 19. And the same thing for the other one is with both, it will be 19 as well. So D is the answer. Now, for number 3, okay, so this type of question is actually found a lot in science classes. So if you take chemistry or biology or even physics, you'll see questions like this. But they also do ask them in a lot of standardized tests. Because what they want you to do is they want you to find a common exponent. You cannot add or do any sort of work with exponents that have with problems that have different exponents. It's hard to, to add and subtract or do whatever you need to do. So the first thing you need to do is to give everything a common exponent. And you typically would go with the largest one. So because the largest exponent is 10 to the 7th, you want to make the 10 to the 5, 10 to the 7th. And how do you do that? Well, you'd have to move this decimal place from the 4.1 over 2 spaces to the left in order to make it times 10 to the 7th. So it would be 0.041 times 10 to the 7th. And now you can just add the way you normally would. You would just add the 2 values, not the exponents, because they share the same exponent. So it would be 3.241 times 10 to the 7th. And that is C. Okay, number 4. Now this one seems quite easy at a first glance, but it's actually a little bit more tricky than you'd think. Now, it's quite easy to just go and you can rule, these two are both forms of 2/3 because they're simplified versions of them. Sorry, this one is simplified and this one is a more complex version, but it's the same fraction. But these two, A and B, if you use a calculator, some calculators would give you one and some calculators would give you the other. But the answer here is actually A, and let me tell you why. Because when you're working with fractions, that's the most precise, you want to get the most precise answer. So when you have 0.6 with a bar over it, that's just assuming that everything else after it is 6. But that's simply not the case. If you actually go and divide it out, you would get A, which is 0.666667. And although that A does round to B, A is the more precise answer. Okay, number 5. Now for number 5, the easiest way to do this is to just what I call plug and chug. You just plug in values and you work them out. Now, a trick for plugging and chugging is to plug in the most easy number to work with, which is usually always 0 or 1. I always go for 0 first, and then if 0 doesn't work, I go for 1, and then so on and so forth. So we do have a 0 here. So what I do is I just plug in the 0. So you have, I think that is 0 here. And then 0 times 8.05 plus 1.95 equals 0. So you would have 0, I'm sorry, the other t is supposed to equal 0 too. So you'd get 0 times 8.05 plus 1.95 equals 0. And it just so happens that that is true because when you multiply any number by 0, you get 0. So 0 is the answer, and that is D. Okay, number 6. Okay, so if you plug in -3 for this problem, negative 3 plus 3, and then over 3 plus negative 3, you'd get 0 divided by 0. And 0 divided by 0 is not 0. 0 divided by, sorry, someone asked how is 2/3 not 0.6? Okay. The answer is not 0.6 with a bar because that's the least precise answer. That answer is just the rounded version of A. You never want to pick the most simple, you never want to pick the answer that's the least precise. You want to pick the answer that is the most precise. And A is the most precise because it doesn't round. That's the full answer when you do it out. Which test is this? One second, everybody. Yes, A is the most precise. Wait, yes. You want, no, B is not the answer because it's the least precise. It's a rounded version of A. Because what you do is A is 0.0666, it has a lot of sixes. So what the person did was instead of just writing it fully out, you can just do 0.06 with a bar. But that's not the full answer. The full answer is really 0.06666667. Sorry, someone is having trouble accessing the links. One second. Okay. Does everyone understand now? B, they rounded the original answer. You never want to go with that. B is not the answer because it's not, it's rounded, it's a rounded version of the real answer. They, instead of writing it the full way out, the way that they should have, they ended up just saying, you know what, let me take the easy way out and just write 0.6 with a bar. They don't equal each other. A is the more precise answer because B assumes that there's no 7. B assumes that it's 0.6666666 forever. When you have a bar on top of a number means a repeat. Yes, so A is the answer and not B. A is the most precise answer. Oh my goodness, I'm tripping everything up. Okay, one second. Sorry. Ugh. 2/3 equals 0.66666 forever. Exactly. A just rounds that to 7. Sorry. B is the answer because the 7 here should not, it's just, they just, instead of writing it all the way out 0.66666 forever, they rounded it to a 7. The true answer is 0.6 with a bar because the truth is that it goes on forever with 6s. Sorry, everyone. Okay, I made a little mistake. Exactly. Oops. I'm glad I caught that. Okay. For number 6, are you guys okay to go on now? Can we go to number 6? By the way, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So for number 6, they have 4 different options. This one is also another plug and chug answer. But it is what that is not equal to 2/3. Okay. It's the, yes, A does not equal 2/3. Yes, A does not equal 2/3 because A, they instead of writing it 0.6 forever, they chose to round one of the last 6s to a 7. No, yes, so A is the answer because A does not equal 2/3. Yes, A is the answer. In fact, let me erase it. A does not equal 2/3 because it is the least precise. It doesn't, they rounded the 7, they rounded one of the 6's to a 7 so that they could end it and stop writing it because it's really 0.6 forever. Okay. For number 6, for what value of x is the equation x plus 3 divided by 3 plus x equals 0? True. So this one is another plug and chug. You're going to plug in values from the problem and you're going to see which gives you an answer. Okay, so I always start with 0 first because 0 is the most easy number to work with. You're going to get 0 plus 3 over 3 plus 0 equals 0. Not true. 3 divided by 3 is equal to 1, so you know that that can't work. That also crosses out C because all real numbers assume that every number that you plug in would give this problem 0, which is not true because we just established that if you plug 0 in, you don't get 0, you get 1 for this problem. So now A, -3 plus 3 over 3 plus -3. This would give you a 0 divided by 0 error. 0 divided by 0 does not equal 0. So 0 divided by 0 is not real. There's no answer. That's a divide by 0 error. So 0 divided by 0 does not equal 0. So A can't be the answer. Therefore, D is the answer because out of all the ones that we crossed out, this is the only one left standing. For number 7, now what they want you to do, they want you to think, oh, well, I can just do the square root of 25 plus the square root of 144. But no, you cannot do that when you are working with roots. That's a no. What you have to do is you have to simplify what's under the square root. You have to work with what you got. So 25 plus 144 is 169. The square root of 169 is 13. The answer is B. Okay? Any questions on this first page? I know 4 was a little bit of a mistake. I'm sorry I did mess that one up, but I'm glad that we've got it clarified now. Is everyone good? Can we move on?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Now I do have to do some erasing because just to get a clean slate. Okay, they want to know what the median score is. Okay. The bar graph shown represents the scores of 10 different dogs at an obedience trial. What is the mean score? Okay, so we have 10 dogs. Now, from this graph. And what you would typically do when you're doing the mean, if you had a lot of time, was you would go from the lowest to the highest and write out the scores of all of these 10 animals, 1, 50, 200, whatever. But this is a standardized test. We don't have time. So we have to do what we can to get this question done in as little time as possible. So that being said, because this has an even value of numbers, you want to look at the two middle values of that would be for the median. So that would be from the two middle values. Now another thing that could trip you up is you would say, okay, let me just go to 5 and 6. That's not right. When you're writing out the median, you don't write the middle two dogs. You're looking at the median of the scores. So you have to look at the two middle scores. So the two middle scores, we go from lowest to highest and we look at numbers 5 and the middle 2 out of the 10. So 2. 3. So you're looking at this one right here. Sorry, this one and this one. But what's between, you have to now add the two, add them up and divide them by 2. Or you could know that what's the number right in the middle of 180 and 190? It's 185. So 185 is the answer. Do you guys understand that? I can show you by writing it out as well if you need better clarification. You guys can ask me questions. This is for you. Let me know if you need more clarification or not. Can I repeat it? Okay. So normally what you do, and I'll show you both ways. What you would do when you're calculating the mean is you would write all the values from the lowest to the highest. So you would go, okay, you have 155, you have 160, you have 175 twice. Oops. Oh no, it wiped clean. Okay. Oh, there we go. Never mind. 175. 175. 180. 190. 195 3 times. Sorry, I have to go back over here. 195. And then you have 200. And you would cross back and forth until you got the middle. You would cross back and forth until you got the middle values. And then you would add them and divide them by 2, which would give you 185. That takes a lot of time. So what I'm saying is instead of doing that and writing them out, what you can do is you can look at those 180 and 190 from the graph. You can look at those 2 middle test scores from the graph. So you see here we have the 180 value and the 190 value. You can just add them together and divide them by 2 and you get 185. Instead of writing them all out, you can just use what the graph gives you. Does that make more sense? Do you guys understand it better now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. You guys have to talk or else I can't know if you guys understand something or not, okay? So please, if you understand something, tell me. If you don't understand something, tell me. All right. So for number 9, 2 machines are used to make the same kind of electronic parts. Machine A makes 2 times the number of defective parts as machine B. There was a total of 6 defective parts made from yesterday by both machines. How many defective parts did machine B make yesterday? Okay, so you have to make an equation from the question that they give you. So machine A makes 2 times the number of defective parts as machine B, which really means that in order to get the number of defective parts that A has, you have to have 2 of B. So 2B equals A. Now, when you're writing an equation, it's easier to solve if everything is the same variable. So we know that 2B equals A, right? And we have 6 defective parts made yesterday by both machines. So we have 2B, which really equals A, plus B, which is B, the machine B, equals 6. That's the total number of defective parts, which really adds up to 3B equals 6, and 6 divided by 3 is 2, so B equals 2. So A is the answer. All right, for number 10. Lisa has taken 3 tests so far in her biology class. Her scores on these tests are 93, 89, and 95. The score on her final exam will be counted twice in her mean. What is the lowest score she can get on her final exam and have a mean score of no less than 93? Okay, so they want you to calculate the mean. They want it to be equal to or above 93. or they want it to be right, you know, as close to 93 as possible, like above, but close. They don't want it to be below 93, and they don't want it to be, they want it to be as close to 93 as possible. That it's equal to or above. So what you need to do is you need to first calculate the mean of the three values that they give you, which is when you add 93 plus 89 plus 95 divided by the three because you have 3 tests. And this equals 92.3 with a bar. So you need to, she has one more exam, and she wants to make sure that her exam that she takes gives her a test score of a little bit higher, equal to or above 93, or as close to 93 as you can get. So we need a value. From this data, we can see that we can't get a value that's equal to 90. You need a value that's a little bit above 93 so that you can raise the mean score so that it's above or as close to 93 as possible. So that's why I would say, let me not start with 93 because that seems a little too low for me. I also think that 94 is a little bit low. But 95 and 96, we can try those values and let's see what works. So I'm going to start off with C. You add in the 95. And you then divide it by 4.
Are you kidding me? This is actually dumb.
Hello? Is everything okay? Is everyone understanding what I'm saying, or do I need to repeat myself?
I get it.
I get it.
I get
Okay.
it.
I get it.
Okay, so we're trying 95. So you'd add it up, all up, and you would divide it by 4. And it just so happens that when you, no, you wouldn't multiply it by 4. You'd have to add up all the values and divide it by 4 in order to get the mean. You're taking the mean of these values. No, wait. That does also work too, but I'm gonna show it this way just because I think it's a little bit easier and more straightforward to understand. So you calculate the mean of these values, and you would end up getting right on the nose 93. When you calculate the mean, you would get 93. So it happens that 95 is the answer. And because we want an answer that's as close to 93 as possible, we know that 96 would be too big. That's true. So Max does have another way of doing it. Max, but I think that this way is more straightforward to understand, which is when you add them up and you'd multiply 93 by 4 because you'd have 4 tests, and you subtract the sum of all these 3 values by the 93 times 4. However, I think that this way is a little bit more straightforward to understand if you know how to work with means. So that's why I explained it this way. But yes, that is a fast shortcut. Is everyone okay? Do you guys understand the way that I did it? The problem?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Max did have a really wonderful shortcut though, but I think this way is a little bit more straightforward to understand if you know how to work with means. Okay, 11. So Jane recorded the number of pets owned by each student in her class in the data table shown. What is the mode of the data? Okay. So really what this question is asking is, which number of pets do the most number of students own? I know this question can seem a little bit tricky because you want to work with the number of students instead of the number of pets, but really this question is surrounded by the number of pets that most students own. So you really want to focus on this value. Oops. I mean on this part when you're working. Okay. So you just go right across and you look at and see, you know, so 5 is not the greatest. The most number of students, 6 students own 1 pet. So the most students from this whole data set own 1 pet. So the answer is 1. Okay, if n and m are prime numbers, what is the least common multiple of 8n, 6nm, and 4n squared? So first, let's work with the integers. The least common multiple of 8, 6, and 4 is 24. Who wrote that? Please stop writing on the screen. But yes, the least common multiple is 24. Now we work with the letters or the other part. I can't disable the annotations because I have to annotate the test. So that means that you guys have to stop or we can't keep working. Okay. So all of these 3 values have an n, but this one has an n squared. And because you can't, when you're doing the least, when you're doing the least common multiple, every value has all these values can be multiplied to make n squared, but n squared can't be turned, well it can, but when you're doing least common multiple, you have to look at the lowest value that they all have in common, and the lowest value that these 3 have in common happens to be n squared. So you have to pay attention to the n squared here. And because one of the values has an m, you can multiply the other 2 to have n as well. So the answer is D. You'd have to do both the least common multiple for the 8, 6, and 4, and then also for the n, the nm, and the n squared. Does this make sense? You guys, does this make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. You have 3x minus 3 equals xy minus y. What is the value of y? Now, the long way to do this would be to plug in all these values and try and solve it, but there's an easier way to do it. 3x minus 3 equals something x minus something. So it sort of has like a similar pattern. So my guess is to just plug in, what I think is right is when you plug in the value, let's see if they have the same pattern. And it just so happens when you plug in 3 to the other side of the equation, you would get 3x minus 3. So we know that y equals 3 because both sides of the equation are the same. And when you have y on one side, when you plug in the 3, both equations are the same. That's your goal. So instead of solving for it, you can just physically do it by plugging in the 3. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. For this one, it's just simplifying expressions, but if you have a hard time visualizing it, what I would recommend doing is, first off, make sure that you apply this negative sign to both parts of the equation, which is negative 4x to the 4y squared minus plus, see, there you go, plus 3x squared y to the 4th. And you can just add and physically manipulate the problem. You would end up doing, so you have to look and make sure that you have the same exponents, that you're working with the same, you know, like, you have to work with the same likeness, the same exponents have to be, you know, worked with. So what I do is if you see, you know, for example, this one has an x to the fourth y squared, the other one that has an x to the fourth y squared, I would make a similar marking on it, just that you can see that they're the same. And the other one that's different, you'd find its partner and you'd give it a different shape. So first we work with the ones that are we squared. You have 3x to the fourth y squared minus 4x to the fourth y squared, which equals negative x to the fourth y squared. And the only answer that gives you that is C. But if you'd like to make sure, we can do the other one as well. So you do 2x x squared y to the fourth plus 3x squared y to the fourth, which gives you 5x squared y to the fourth. So they both match up, and C is the answer. Does that make sense? Yes, no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we move on to number 15. You don't really understand, Owen? Okay. They want you to simplify the expression to one of these answers, but you have to see which one, you have to simplify in order to see which is the right one. When you look at it, you have to work, the same exponents can be worked together, but you can't add or subtract numbers with different exponents. So you have to find the two that have the same exponents. So x squared y to the fourth, you have 2x squared y to the fourth right here. Now we have to find the other part in the equation that has x squared y to the fourth. This part, 3x squared y to the fourth, has the same exponent, so we can add and subtract these two. And then you have the 3x to the fourth y squared. Well, this one is a little different. You can't add this to 2x squared y to the fourth because they don't have the exact same exponents. You have x to the fourth here, and then you have x squared over here, and y to the fourth over there, and y squared over here. You can't work with them because they don't share the same exponents. But over here, you have this one over here has the same exponents as 3x to the fourth y squared. So you can add and subtract these two to simplify the equation. So what I do is, first of all, we have a negative sign right here. So you want to apply that to both of these values. You'd have minus 4x to the fourth y squared. And then because there's a minus here, you'd have to minus times minus gives you a positive. So you'd have plus 3x squared y to the fourth. So now we add and subtract or do what we need to do with the numbers that have the same exponents. So 2x squared y to the fourth plus 3x squared y to the fourth gives you 5x squared y to the fourth. And we can do this because they share the same exponents, which you find right here. But A can't be right because we have this whole other part of the problem that they haven't addressed here. So we also have to deal with we have to deal with positive 3x to the fourth y squared minus 4x to the fourth y squared. And that, when you subtract those two values, you get minus x to the fourth y squared. So that's the rest of the problem. It simplifies each other out. And it simplifies to this, to C. Okay. Awesome. Glad it makes sense. Okay. For 15. For what values of x does x squared minus 25 divided by x plus 2 times x minus 3 equals 0? So what they're really asking you to do is to find you have to find the zeros of both of these quadratic equations. And what you do to find the zero is, for the bottom two, well, first, if it's not, worked out into this form, two fraction, of two, if the quadratic is not simplified into this, into this form, you have to do that first. So, which we have to do with x squared minus 25. And when you simplify that out, in order to get this, you have to find which two values multiply to give you this, which happens to be x minus 5 times x plus 5. And then that over x plus 2, x minus 3. Now the next part to do is you have to see what x is when you set each of these little parts equal to 0. So you take each part. So we will start with x plus 2. X plus 2 set equal to 0 gives you equals -2, because 0 minus 2 is -2. And then when you do it with x minus 3 equals 0, you get x equals 3. And so we can do the same for the other two, and that would give you x would equal 5, and then x would equal -5. So all of these four values, 3, -2, 5, and -5, makes the problem equal 0, makes each part equal 0. So you have to find all the zeros, and that happens to be, okay, no. But that's a trick, because the easiest thing to do is multiply. When you multiply these values by 0, you get 0. So that crosses this entire thing out. That's what they wanted you to do. They wanted you to do the whole thing out. But that takes time. What you can do, you multiply the denominator by the 0. But you're not dividing anything by 0. You're multiplying by 0. You're multiplying this denominator by 0 because it's on the other side. You want to cancel it out. You want to get x squared. Sorry. You want to make this equal 0. So you have x squared minus 25 equals 0 over all this nonsense. Over x plus 2 times x minus 3. And when you multiply this entire denominator by 0, you get 0. You're canceling out the denominator. So this gets canceled out because when you multiply anything by 0, it equals 0. So you're left with x squared minus 25 equals 0. And as we said before, you have to simplify it so you can find the zeros of that problem. And we remember from before it was x minus 5, x plus 5. And when you set both of those parts equal to 0, you're going to get x equals 5 and x equals -5. Those are the two answers. Does this make sense, you guys?
Yep.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let me erase, and we're going to keep going. Okay. Which expression is equivalent to the expression x minus 2 times x plus 3? This one, you just have to FOIL out to get the answer. So you'd x times x is x squared. And you have x times 3 gives you 3x, so plus 3x. Then multiply the 2 minus 2 times, the -2 times the x, you get minus 2x. Then the -2 times the 3 gives you minus 6. So then you simplify like terms. So this plus 3x just becomes plus x because 3 minus 2 is 1. And then you have the x squared plus x minus 6. The answer is D. The graph of the line is shown. What is the slope of the line? Now, the long way to do this is what you'd think. You know, you find 2 coordinates on the graph, you'd write out the coordinates, and you do rise over run, blah, 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 blah. But there's an easier way to go about doing this. When you just use the graph that they give you. You can find the slope using what you've got. So slope is rise over run, right? So what I do is, every time, we'll start from the top. Every time you run 1, you go over 1, you end up going down 2. So you run 1, you would go down by 2. So the easiest way to do it is you would use that information to do your rise over run formula. Your rise is -2 because you're going down 2 values for every 1. So -2 is your rise. Then your run is 1 because for every 1 value, if every time you go down 2, you go over 1. So the slope is -2 divided by 1. But nobody really, whenever you divide by 1, it really is just the value of the numerator. So the answer is -2, which is B. Does that make sense? Yes, no?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's keep going. So for number 18, point 1,8 is on the circle with center -2, 4. What is the radius of the circle? Okay, this one is a straightforward distance. You have to use the distance formula to solve this problem. The distance formula is x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Sorry, that's all square root, under the same square root. So when you plug in these values from the equations, from the points given, and it actually, this is good to know, whatever coordinates you use as x2 and x1, it doesn't really matter. This can be x1, the -2, or this can be x1. And this, but what matters is that you stay consistent. So if you have this one as your x2, you can't then say that this y value is y1. This would have to be y2 as well. Okay, just so that we're clear. But anyways, you plug everything into the equation, and you would get 1 minus -2 squared plus 8 minus 4 squared. And when you simplify this, you get 1 plus 2 is 3, which is 3 squared plus 4 squared. That means square root of 9 plus 16. 9 plus 16 is 25. So square root of 25 is equal to plus or minus 5. But because you can never have a negative distance, the negative sign, the negative value is disregarded. So the answer has to be positive 5. All right, and the answer is 5 grid units. Do you guys understand that? All set? All right, I'm taking that as a yes. Terry is planning a survey to try to determine the average number of hours students at her school spend watching TV. Which sample of students will give her the most reliable information about the students in her school? Okay, so whenever they give you a survey question they want to find the most reliable information. You want to look at something called bias. You want to find the answer that has the least bias, or something that bias is something that could negative or impact the results of your answers. You want to look at something that has the least bias, something that is free from being affected. So if Terry asked her friends to give her information about the school, she's disregarding the opinions of all the other students in the school besides her friends. So that's a form of bias. You want to find, as when you're taking a sample of students, you want to get the most data possible from the most different types of people. So her friends is too small of a sample size. All the people that show up to watch a football game, again, too small of a sample size, not everyone in the school. Then a random sample of students in the library before school. Again, too small of a sample size. You're not looking at everyone or the opinions of majority of the people in the school. So B is the correct answer, because a random sample is when you don't know who you're picking. You don't know if that person is a friend, is a football person, is whatever. You want to find the person that, you want to find a group of people that display a wide variety of opinions. So when it's random, you get a variety of opinions, and that, which reduces the amount of bias that you have, or that the sample would have, the survey would have. So B happens to be the answer. Clear? You guys can talk. If you don't understand something, you can tell me. If you do, you can tell me. Just let me know. If you sit there in silence, I can't help. Lucy, did you say something? I couldn't hear you.
Oh no, sorry.
Are you good? You understand everything?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, sorry.
No problem. All good. Okay. 20. The measures of three of the angles of a quadrilateral are shown in the diagram. Wait, hold on. I would say typically any sort of linear algebra test, like most of these tests, they have a linear algebra section, like the ones you've seen, you know, for these past couple of questions, they've been algebra. And the distance formula is something that is very well known in algebra. I would say it's really important to know it, because even if you get everything else and you missed that one problem is a point that you could have had to get a raise your score. So whatever you see, even if you rarely see it, it's something that's useful to have, just because that could be a hard question that they could use to separate the leaders from the people that don't understand as much. So I would say whatever you see, whatever formula that you see, keep note of it, because it could come to use eventually. And also the distance formula is something that you see on the SAT, the PSAT, and on the ACT. So I would definitely think that it's important to know. But yeah, this is common. This is a common concept for algebra. So, all right. So for number 20, the measures of three of the angles of a quadrilateral are shown in the diagram. Okay. So when you have a quadrilateral, all of the angles that are there need to add up to 360 degrees. So you're missing one value. But what you can do is use the information that you have to discover what that missing angle degree is. So you would add these three up, or you use the formula 360. Oops. Why is it so big? 10. 360 minus these three values added together. So 110 plus 75 plus 130 should equal that missing degree. All right, so when you work your when you simplify everything and you add it up, and then you subtract that value from 360, you should receive 45 degrees, which is the answer. Okay, 21. The 6-member debate team plans to send 3 of its members to a conference. How many combinations of 3 members are possible from the 6-member team? Okay, so this is a probability problem, but it uses a concept that we know as combinations. And what a combination is you use combinations to calculate events where the order of the people or whatever value doesn't matter. So in this case, it doesn't matter. The order of the three members doesn't matter. What matters is that there are three members from the team. So that's why we know that this is a combination. And the formula for combinations is n factorial over, r factorial times n minus r factorial. And what the n stands for, the n stands for the total number of people. In this case, it stands for the total number of people. So that we have 6 members of the team, and that's what the n stands for. The largest, the group that you're sampling from, which is 6. And then the r is the sample. So you're sampling 3 members from that 6. So the r is equal to 6. So let me just write this out. This equals n, and the 3 equals the r. Now, does everyone here know what a factorial is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we know that when you plug everything in, you get 6 factorial over 3 factorial. And then when you do the 6n minus r, it's just 6 minus 3 factorial, which is another 3 factorial. And when you work your magic and simplify everything out, you end up getting b, which is 20. All good? All right, I'm just gonna assume that everything is good. Can I go over it again? Okay. See, this is why you guys please speak up. I'm gonna move forward if nobody speaks. You guys have to let me know if you understand something or if you don't understand something. Okay, but the person who asked. All right, Madeline, do you mind just clarifying what is it that you don't understand about the problem? When order does matter, you'd use a different formula, and you would, that formula, when order does matter, it's called a permutation. But that's not really what we're doing right now. That's a little bit, extra, but this is a combination because order doesn't matter. Now, Madeline, what don't you understand? Can I explain the formula? Okay. So when you're doing a combination, you're looking at when the order of the sample doesn't matter. So they're not asking you to order the people. The order of the 3 members doesn't matter. They just want you to have 3 members. So that's how we know that we're using a combination. And the formula for a combination is this. Okay, so the n in this formula equals the total number of people that you're sampling from. And in this case, you have a 6-member team that you're sampling from. You're sampling from that big value of 6. So that is what the n is. It's the total number. The r value is the sample, what you're picking out from the larger group. And you're picking 3 members from the larger group. So the 3 members is your r value. So you would then just plug them into the equation. Get 6 factorial over r factorial times n minus r factorial. Now, Madeline, do you understand what factorials are? Okay. Do you understand a little bit better what I'm talking about? Okay, cool. Let's keep going. No problem. Okay. So for number 22, the grid shows 3 vertices of a parallelogram. Which could be the coordinates of the 4th vertex of the parallelogram? So you guys know that if you're building a parallelogram, two sides, the two opposite sides need to be parallel to each other. So what I recommend doing is you just pick the values, you put them on the graph, and you see which ones give you a parallelogram or give you two opposite sides that are parallel from each other. And when you do that, let's see. Start with A. -3, 5. Oops. Okay, -3, 5. Now when you do this, you build a shape like this. These two sides are not parallel because eventually, if you keep on going with them, they're going to cross at some point. They get closer and closer, so they're not parallel. So this can't be the answer. And for B, let's see. -2, 0. Again, can't be the answer because even if they look like they could work, this one is getting closer and closer over time, and this one is eventually getting closer and closer, and they will cross at some point. Now, C, 0, 1. Oops. Definitely not a parallelogram. These sides are going to cross, and eventually these sides are going to cross too. Can't work. So by process of elimination, D has to be the answer. But just to make sure, we'll plug it in. 7, 2. Now this one is a parallelogram because both sides are parallel. These two are parallel to each other, and these two are parallel to each other. They won't cross. You guys got it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's keep going. 23. This one is another plug and chug. So you just plug in the values that you see here. Well, it could be, or you could just solve it out, which is what I did in this case. So you have 4x minus 7. I would just plug in values. So let's plug in the values of D. You have 4x greater than or equal to 9 plus, wait, no. Sorry, just plug in values. So you have x is less than or equal to -1/2. Let's plug it in. 4 times -1/2 is equal to -4 divided by 2, which is -2. -2 minus 7 gives you -9, and the absolute value of that is 9. 9 is greater than or equal to 9, so that checks that part out. Now, let's try 4. So when x is greater than or equal to 4, well, let's plug it in. You have 4 times 4, which is 16, minus 7, which is 9. Absolute value of 9 is 9. And 9 is definitely greater than or equal to 9. But again, you would just plug in values to see which gives you the right answers. Do you guys understand?
Yes.
Awesome. So what type of number could not result from the difference of two irrational numbers? Now this one is quite complex. Bless you. But I'll tell you right now. The answer for 24 is C. And let me tell you why. Complex numbers are formed by a combination of a real and imaginary part. So, for example, an example of a complex number would be 1 plus I. And I is an imaginary number because it's the square root of -1. And it's imaginary because square root of -1, you can't take the square root of a negative number, so that's why it's imaginary. So 1 plus I has its real and it has its imaginary part. Now, the reason why you can't form a complex number by the difference of two irrational numbers is because irrational numbers, while they may be real, you have a real irrational number. Irrational numbers cannot be imaginary. So complex numbers require an imaginary part, and irrational numbers are not imaginary. So that's why a complex number can't be formed by the difference of two irrational numbers. Do you guys kind of understand?
Not really.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. I know it's a little bit hard to take in, but this is one of the things that you kind of have to memorize. Complex number, when you look at what a complex number is formed by two parts. It has a real part. A real number is any number on the number line. And also, and they're fractions. So it has, say, for example, 1 plus I is a complex number because it has a real part. The 1 is real. 1 is real. 1 is a real number. And then it also has its irrational part. And I is irrational because I is equal to the square root of -1. And the square root of -1 is irrational because you cannot take the square root of any sort of negative number. So that's why 1 plus I is a complex number. Now, the reason that you can't form a complex number by subtracting two irrational numbers from each other is because irrational numbers, while they can be real, irrational numbers cannot be imaginary because imaginary numbers don't exist. The square root of -1 does not exist. But irrational numbers such as irrational numbers such as like a never-ending, fractions at like 0.5, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, whatever, like these are real, but this is not. This is irrational. Irrational numbers cannot be imaginary. Imaginary numbers don't exist, but irrational numbers do exist. They're just irrational. Imaginary numbers don't exist. There's no way that you can take the square root of -1. So that's why you can't form a complex number by subtracting two irrational numbers because they don't have any sort of imaginary part to them. Does that make better sense? I know it's a little bit of a hard concept to understand, but once you know what forms a complex number, with the real and the irrational and the imaginary part, and you realize that irrational numbers are not imaginary, that's why C has to be the answer. Does that make a little bit more sense? This one is something that you just have to memorize. You have to memorize the definitions of all these words. Do you guys kind of get it better? A little bit?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I urge you all to memorize the definitions of these terms, because they will come up all the time throughout your entire standardized testing, you know, throughout every test that you take, I guarantee it. They usually come up, they come up a lot on the SAT and ACT too. Okay. 25. The graph shows the number of books read by the students in Miss Shill's class last summer. The numbers on the horizontal axis, so the horizontal axis, or the x-axis, represent the number of books read during the summer. And the height of the bar graph, or the y-axis, represents the number of students who read this number of books. What is the mean number of books read over the summer? Now, the easiest thing to do is, when you're calculating the mean from a graph, what you have to do is you have to multiply each value, like each x and y value together, and then add them up, which is something like this. So you have 1 book times 5, so it's 1 book and then 5 students, so it's 1 times 5, to give you the total number of books, because 5 students read 1 book, which means that it's really 5 books in total read. So you have 1 times 5, then plus 2 times 4, and plus 2 times 3, then 4 times 1, 5 times 6. Sorry, I can't do it all in one line. And then that plus 6 times 2. And when you work this entire line out, you'll get 65. This is one of these things where you're just going to have to do it out, which is why you save up your time in the beginning doing these in order to be able to have more time for these longer, more tedious problems. So when you solve this all out, you end up getting 65. Now, when you're doing the mean, you want the total. So we're looking at the mean number of books. So first, when you're doing the mean, you take the total number of books read divided by the number of students who read. So the total number of books read is 65. And then you add up the values of the number of students who read these values of these books. And when you do that, you get 20, because 5 students read 1, so it's 5, plus 4 students read this one, so it's 5 plus 4, which is 9, plus 2, 11, 1, 13, and you keep on going, so on and so forth. And then you do 65 divided by 20, which equals, in order to find the mean, and that equals 3.25, which is the mean. Do you guys understand this?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So now we do 26. A solution set is graphed on the number line shown. So it's these values between, it has to be between 1 and -7, because it's between 0 and 2, between -6 and -8. So the solution set of which inequality is shown. And this one requires you, it's quite tedious, you just have to go through and solve. But in this case, the answer is D, but we'll do it out anyways. x plus 3. So you subtract 3 here, and then you'd subtract the 3 there. X is less than 4 minus 3. So x has to be less than 1, which is true because here x is between 1 and negative 7, and it's not including it. So x is less than 1. That value, that is in fact true. Now we have to get this other part, and what you do is you have to flip the sign. X plus 3 is greater than, and then that makes this 4 negative. And you go about solving as usual. X minus 3, x plus 3 minus 3. So that cancels out the 3, and you subtract 3 on this side. You get x is greater than negative 7, which is true. X is greater than negative 7 on the number line. So both parts of this solution set are satisfied by this equation. All good? What happens if x is equal to 1? If x is 1? If x is 1, then there wouldn't really be much, there wouldn't be a solution set. There wouldn't be, it's just one value. Like you wouldn't have to solve like this. You already know what x is. There's no reason you don't have to solve for x. There wouldn't be a set, it would only be one value. But because there's an x here, it's a set of solutions. There's 2 solutions that you can have. But we're not, x is not 1 here, so we don't really have to worry about that. Okay, 27. A coin is tossed 3 times. The table shows the possible outcomes and the probability of each outcome. What is the expected number of heads? Now, whenever you're doing probability and you hear the word expected, this is when the term expectations comes into play. So when you're doing expectations, an expectation is really the weighted sum of all possible outcomes for a random variable. So in this case, the variable is the number of heads. And you're weighting all of these possible outcomes. You have to weight them by taking into account the number of heads and the probability associated with them in order to find the expected number of heads. So what you would do to find the expectation is you would, sort of like how we did with the mean problem, you multiply 0 times 1/8. Why is it doing this? 0 times 1/8 plus 1 times 3/8, which is just 3/8. And then 2 times 3/8, which is 6/8. Sorry. Oh my God, why is it doing this? Sorry, plus. And then 3 times 1/8, which is 3/8 again. And you would simplify this out. Now 0 times 1/8 is 0, so it's not really taken into account. Then you do 3/8 plus 6/8, which is 9/8, and 9/8 plus 3/8 is 12/8. And you would simplify that out to be 3/2, which is the answer. Now, again, expectations is something that you have to sort of memorize. You have to understand that you have to, whenever you're told to find the expected value of something, you multiply the probability by the outcome that has that probability. You multiply them together, then you add all of those values up in order to find the expected number. Do you guys understand?
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. Next, 28. There are 0.305 meters in 1 foot. There are 5,280 feet in 1 mile. A horse is traveling at a speed of 400 meters per minute. Which expression has a value equal to the horse's speed in miles per hour? Okay, so because they want everything in miles per hour, you need to make sure that your hour value is in the denominator and your miles value is in the numerator because it's miles per hour. So you have to take each of these values into account in order to solve this problem. But let's start off with 400 meters per minute. So because you want everything to be in miles per hour, minutes, when 1 minute has, 1 hour has 60 minutes. And in order to ensure that the time value stays in the denominator so you can have hours in the end, you need to start with that. And you need to make sure that it starts on the bottom. So 400 meters per minute. So you have 400 on the top because the distance can be turned into miles. And the time can be turned, the minutes can be turned into hours. So you start with 400 on the numerator. And you have your minute on the bottom. You have your 1 minute on the bottom. Then that times, you need to cancel out the number of minutes. And you know that 1 minute has 60 seconds, one hour, you need to get it into hours. So 1 hour has 60 minutes. 16 minutes per hour. So that cancels out the minutes. So now everything is in hours. So the hours is fine. But now we need to worry about the distance. We need to get from meters to miles. But what they give us here, they go from meters to feet and then from feet to miles. So we have to do the same. So now that we realize that it's, and by the way, these two ones can sort of be disregarded because whenever you multiply, the one is not a value that's really, when you multiply anything by 1, it's just itself. So that can be disregarded. So now we're stuck with 400 on the top times 60. And now we need to get this 400, we need to get these meters and turn them into miles. So to do that, we know that there are 305 meters in 1 foot. So to cancel out from meters, you have to put, you have to, here, 400 meters, 1 minute. And you need to cancel out the meters. So you have 1 foot has 0.305 meters. Now you can cancel out these values. And now that you canceled out the meters, you're now at a foot, now into feet. You need to go from feet to miles. So what you do is you multiply that value by 1 mile has 5,280 feet. And now you've canceled the feet out. And now you're in miles. So how does this look when we put it all together? Well, you have the 400 times the 60 in the numerator. And then you have this 0.305 and the 5,280 in the denominator. Sorry, this looks really bad, but the answer is A because it has the same format as the answer that we've gotten from working it out. Do you guys understand?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, it's a little messy. It's really hard to try and work everything out with an Apple Pencil. And fingers, so. Yeah. Not sure, Max. I think it is. Okay. Next. Okay. Alan measures the height of a pole to be 3 feet and the length of its shadow of the pole to be 5 feet, as shown in the diagram. At the same time, the shadow of a tree is 20 feet in length. What is the height of the tree? Now, because it's at the same time, you can use this information to help you solve what the height of the tree will be. And it ends up being something like this. You have a 3-foot height has a 5-foot shadow. And we know that the tree has a 20-foot shadow. So you put that on the denominator like the other one. Yeah, Max, can we not share the answer out before we get to the solution? Like before we work it out? Thank you so much. Awesome. You have 20 in the bottom. But yeah, you have 5, then you cross multiply, you get 5x, and 3 times 20 is 60. 60 divided by 5 is in fact 12. Okay. What is the most reasonable unit to use when measuring the length of a leaf? Okay, so first of all, when you're measuring length, you don't use grams. Grams and kilograms are used to measure the weight, the mass of something. So that can't be used to measure the length of something. Now, meters are huge. It's and 1 meter, I think, is 36 inches. I don't remember the exact value, but they're very long. They have several feet in them. And we know that leaves are not several feet long. So the best answer, centimeters. Okay. For 31, best thing to do, just to work it out. And I will start. Now the thing is that these values will give you integers because the square root of 4 is 2. 2, and then the square root of 25 is 5. So if you can take the square root and get an integer, then that's not the answer because they want to know what doesn't represent an integer. So right off the bat, we can cross A and B out. Now for C. Now remember, when you're doing it, when you're given a subtraction problem underneath the exponent, you can't just say root 25 minus root 4. You can't do that. You have to simplify what's under the exponent first. What's under the square root sign first. So 25 minus 4 gives you 21. And we know that when you take the square root of 21, you don't really get an integer value. Like when you memorize your square roots, 5 squared is 25, but then when you square 4, this is the value right below 5, you get 16. So you know that the square root of 21 is somewhere between those two values. So it's 4 point something, 4, it's not a solid integer. It's not, so that's why this is the answer, because they want to know which is not an integer, which does not represent an integer. And the square root of 21 does not represent an integer. It has no real roots. You guys got it?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so the circle is inscribed in a square with a side length of 10 centimeters as shown. What is the area of the shaded region? Okay, so first of all, in order to get the area of the shaded region, you need to find both the area of the square and the circle that is inscribed in the square. So the area of the square, base times height, you get a 100. Oops. So right off the bat, A and B, cross those out because remember, you take the area of the square and you subtract the area of the circle from it. So the area of the square we know is already 100, so 40 is out the window. Now, in order to find the area of the circle, it is pi r squared. That's the formula, r being the radius. So because the circle is inscribed in the square, and the diameter of the circle is the same as the length or the base and the height of the square, that means you can use this 10 as a diameter, and from that 10 you can get the radius. Diameter is just 2 times the radius, so the diameter divided by 2 is 5. So you know that 5 is the radius, and now we can use that to calculate the formula, the area of the circle, which the formula is pi r squared, and r squared is 25, and so the answer is 25 pi. Now that crosses out D because it says the area of the circle is 100 pi, which is not right. So C is the answer. All clear?
Yes.
All right, awesome. 33. The height of the cylinder shown is 2 times its diameter. The formula used to find the volume of a cylinder is volume equals radius squared times height times pi, where r is the radius of the cylinder and height, h is the height of the cylinder. If the diameter of the cylinder is 6 inches, what is its volume in inches? Okay, so we know that diameter is really just 2 times the radius. So you can divide the diameter by 2 in order to get the radius. So now when you do that, you realize that the radius is 3. So you have 3 squared. Now for the height, they say in the problem that the height of the cylinder is 2 times its diameter. If its diameter is 6, its height has to be 12 because 2 times 6 is 12. So you have 3 squared times 12 pi times, and that pi times pi. 3 squared is really 9. 9 times 12 times pi gives you B, 108 pi. All clear?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Okay. Okay, 34. The box and whisker plot below represents the high temperature in degrees Fahrenheit at a certain location on the same day in May for the last 50 years. What is the range of the data? Now, in order to find that, you need to know how to read a box and whisker plot. Okay, so when you're looking at a box and whisker plot, the tail or the whisker at the high end, at the highest point, is known as the maximum of the data set. The whisker on the lowest end is known as the minimum of the data set. This center line right here is the median of the data. This line here is the upper quartile. And this value here is a lower quartile. So an upper quartile is the median of the top half of the data set, like the top higher values of the data. Bye, Allison, thank you for coming. The lower quartile is the median for the lower half of the data set. Okay, but we don't need to worry about that. In order to calculate the range, it's just the minimum subtracted away from the maximum. So we have 80 as the maximum and 25 as the minimum. So 80 minus 25 is 55. B is the answer. All right. 35. A bag contains 4 green marbles, 5 blue marbles, 2 yellow marbles, and 4 orange marbles. Kate randomly removes 1 marble from the bag and keeps it. Joanne then randomly removes a marble from the bag. If the marble Kate removed from the bag was yellow, what is the probability that the marble Joanne removed was green? Okay, so Now, they want to trick you up by thinking that this is really two probability events, but really this is only one event. They want to know what is the probability that the marble Joanne removed was green. So for the numerator, you put the number of green marbles, which is 4. You have 4 green marbles in the set. Now, when you add up all these values, 4 plus 5 plus 2 plus 4, you get 15. But you don't actually have 15 because Kate removed 1 from the bag. So now you have 14. So 14 is the total number of marbles that you have. And that's why A is the answer. For 36. Which expression is equivalent to the expression the square root of 16x to the 16? Okay, so right off the bat, the square root of 16 is 4. So that's why C and D can be crossed out. But when you take the square root of x to the 16th, you don't just, it's not the same. You can't just say, okay, well, square root of 16 is 4, so that's why the answer is x to the 4. No. In reality, because when you're taking the square root of something and you're working with exponents, you just divide this exponent by 2 because you're taking the square root. So it's really x to the 8th. That's why B is the answer. So it's 4x to the 8th. Now 37. Triangle XYZ is shown. The length of XZ is 2 centimeters. Why do you divide by 2? Because you're taking the square root. The square root is root 2. And that's why you divide it by 2. Does everyone understand?
Yes.
All right, cool. Okay, so XZ is 2 centimeters. The measure of angle XYZ is 20 degrees. The value of which expression is equal to the length side of XY? So they want to know this side. They want to know what the hypotenuse is. And so we'll figure it out. So in order to find the hypotenuse, you have to work with your knowledge of sine and cosine and tangent. Now the sine of 20, the sine of XYZ is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So sine 20 is equal to the opposite side, which is 2 centimeters, over the hypotenuse. And because we don't know what the hypotenuse is, put an x here. And then all you need to do is solve for x. So in the end, it should simplify to 2 over sine 20 equals x. And that is what should equal the hypotenuse. Do you guys understand? All clear?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. We're on the final stretch, guys. What is sine, cosine, and tangent? Oh, Lord. Sine, cosine, and tangent are the basics of trigonometry. Whenever you use sine, cosine, and tangent when you're working with triangles, and you use them to find the missing sides or missing angles of a triangle. The sine of a triangle is the opposite side from the angle, which is 2 in this case, divided by the hypotenuse. Opposite over hypotenuse. Tangent is the opposite side over the adjacent side, which is 2 over this line 2 over this line zy. That side, so tangent of 20 would give you that. Cosine is adjacent over the hypotenuse. Yeah, Sohcahtoa. Zachary, does that make more sense? I mean, it takes a long time to go over exactly everything, sine, cosine, tangent, but these are just the basics. All right, cool. Yeah, and thank you, Owen. It is easier to remember it with Sohcahtoa, as in sine equals opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and toa is tangent as equals opposite over adjacent. Okay, which graph represents the solution set of the inequality 41 is less than or equal to 2x minus 1, which is less than or equal to 51. Now, when you're working with inequalities like this, you have to remember that whatever's in the center, whenever you're working the equation out, you have to do it to both sides. So let me show you what I mean by that by actually doing it out. So you have this 2x by 1. You want to solve for x. You need to add the 1 to both sides in order to get rid of it here. So 51 plus 1 is equal to, oh my gosh, wait. 51 plus 1 is equal to 52. Why is it doing this? Hold on. Ugh. Okay. 51 plus 1 is equal to 52. This, which is and 2x, which is equal to. And then you have 41, you have to add the 1 on this side too. You get 42 over here. Now you divide by 2. 42 divided by 2 is 21. Then, oops, 52 divided by 2 is 26. Now, look at the graphs. So the x has to be less than 26 and greater than 21. And when you look at the graph, A is the answer because the set is between 21 and 36. It's right before 30. So that is the answer. All clear?
Yep.
All right, cool. Now, 39. So 39 is a stem and leaf plot. And essentially what that means is that the stem will be the tens place and the leaf will be the ones place for the data. And this is math scores in a test. So this, for example, would be the 50% mark, 60% mark, 70% mark, 80% mark, 90% mark, and 100% mark. Okay. So they want you to calculate the median score on the test. So first off, let's see how many test scores that we have in this data set. We have 55, which is 1, 57, 58, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 30, 31, 32, 33. So 33 students took a test. We have 33 test scores today. And now when you're finding the median, you want the middle value. So the middle value of 33 is between 16 and 17. So in order to calculate the median, you need to find the 16th and 17th test score in this data set, add them together and divide them by 2 in order to get the median. So now we count out to find test scores 16 and 17. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So the middle two test scores, because they're in the 70% mark range, they are 78 and 78. The 8 occurs twice. So you don't really have to add them up and divide them by 2 because you're going to get the same value if they're the same number. So the median score is 78. Do you guys understand?
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Now, for number 40. This one is a little interesting because your natural instinct is probably, to start, doing simplifying the quadratic, blah, 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 blah. But because it's not when you have a perfect square, in order to, have it be like, for example, if you have x squared minus 25, just be x plus 5, x minus 5. It always sort of follows that format where it's a plus of that root and then the minus of that root. But because there's a plus sign, it gets a little interesting. Can't simplify it in that way. So you have to simplify it another way. So x squared equals, why is it doing that? Okay, equals negative 49. You have to subtract the 49 away and then add it, and then subtract it from 0. So you're going to get x squared equals negative 49. And in order to get x by itself, you have to take x equals the square root of negative 49. But wait, you can't take the square root of a negative number because we've already established that the square root of negative 1 is I. It's irrational. You can't take the square root of a negative number. But you can't take the square root of the 49. So the square root of 49 is plus or minus 7. And you still have, however, times the square root of this negative 1. Now we know that the square root of negative 1 is I. So it becomes plus or minus 7I, which is D. You guys got it? Yes? No?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. 41. What is the result of the expression? Oh, okay, so these are matrices. And oftentimes you'll see most standardized tests will offer you questions with matrices. So in order to add matrices, you would just add together the numbers that are in the same spot on both of their respective matrices. So something like this. You would add the 2 to the 5 because they're both in the upper left-hand corner. So 2 plus 5 gives you 7. And then you add the 3 and the 3. So you get 7 and you get a 6 over here. And you add the 0 and the 2, which gives you a 2. And then you add the 4 and the 1, which gives you a 5. Oops, something happened. Okay, the 5. And so A is the answer. Now, for number 42, the formula for the surface area of a sphere is surface area equals 4 pi r squared, where r is the radius of the sphere. A sphere has a surface area of 16 pi. What is the radius of this sphere? So for something like this, you have to work backwards. So you're going to start with what you're given. You know that the surface area equals 16 pi. We already did reading last week. Next week is writing, Tam. Okay, back to the problem. 16 pi equals 4 pi r squared. 4 pi divided by 16 pi gives you 4. So 4 equals r squared. And that gives you 4. When you take the square root of 4, you get plus or minus 2 equals r. But because the radius is a distance, you can't have a negative distance. Like you can't measure, I don't know, like a table and say, this is negative 10 feet. Like that doesn't work. You can't have negative feet or negative distances. So the negative value is disregarded in this case, and the answer is 2. So the answer is 2, which is A. All right, you guys. So this is the end of the test. Do you guys have any questions for me that you'd like me to answer? Go back over any sort of concept that you've seen, or I can answer questions about high school, about me attending a private school that required me to take this test. Another question about the test, or I can talk about college. I'm going to UPenn. So if you'd like to ask me anything, you can. You don't have the PDF. Okay, I'll put the PDF in the chat. No questions, guys? Are there any more advanced formulas we should know, like combinations? I think the most common ones that you'll see on the test will be, you might need to know the permutation. Yeah, probably permutations, which are learned together with combinations. Again, remember we worked, I'll put down a list of what we worked over today, the formulas that you should know. There is not, the next review is going to be an essay review, not a math review. There's no more math reviews. But to finish answering your question, Owen, I would say you should know distance, the distance formula. You should know your basic trig formulas, which is like Sohcahtoa. You should know how to solve for slopes. I would also say matrices. I would say, again, permutations and combinations. And also, what else did we solved for expectations. You want me to review Sohcahtoa. Okay, so someone would like me to go over Sohcahtoa again. Which I can do. Oops. 1 second, guys. Okay. So let me just erase that, and we can start from a fresh blank slate. Okay. So I'll make up my own triangle to do this. Okay. We don't have much time, Edward, so which one? Expectations or Sohcahtoa? I think Sohcahtoa is probably going to be more useful, so we'll do that one. Okay, so when you're working with trigonometry, you have sine, whoops. You have your sine, your cosine, and your tangent. Now, when you're working with a triangle that has some sort of angle, the sine, yeah, and you have to use your angle as a reference point. The sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. That's what you would use to calculate the sine. Now, usually, for most cases, you would have to memorize your trig values, which is something that you would get, you'd learn as you get older. But
wait, what does that say?
What does what say?
The triangle, the
opposite. It just stands for opposite. I'm not writing it all the way out.
And okay.
And this is the adjacent side. When you're looking at it from the perspective of this angle here. So the sine is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, which is why it's called SO. They call it the SO of Sohcahtoa because it's S-O-H, so. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, which is this side over this side. That's why it's called Ka. All right, so this is Ka because it's adjacent over hypotenuse. The C is the cos, A is the adjacent side, and H is hypotenuse. So that's where you get Ka. Tangent is the opposite side over the adjacent side. So you get op over adjacent, which is where you get Toa from. That's where the Sohcahtoa comes into play. All clear?
Yes.
All right, I don't have any more time, and unfortunately we are done for the day. But I want to thank you guys so much for coming, and you guys were great listeners, and I'm happy that we were able to work through this entire set. So Thank you guys so much and have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Have a great one, guys. I'm going to end the meeting now.